My name is Marcus. For nearly 10 years, I've been the person you call when everything goes wrong. I'm a paramedic. I run toward chaos when everyone else runs away. I've pulled people from burning cars, performed CPR in the middle of busy freeways, and held the hands of strangers as they took their final breaths. I thought I had seen it all. I thought my heart had hardened enough to handle anything. I was wrong. It was 3 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday when the call came in. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio with the urgency that makes your blood run cold. Code blue, 24-year-old female, unconscious, not responding. 1247 Sunset Boulevard. My partner Jake and I had been on shift for already 8 hours. We'd handled 2 minor accidents and 1 elderly man having chest pains earlier that evening. Nothing too intense. Nothing that prepared us for what we were about to face. As we raced through the empty streets of Los Angeles, sirens wailing, I remember thinking it was probably another overdose. That's what you expect in this city at 3 in the morning. Young people pushing their limits, making mistakes that cost them everything. But something in the dispatcher's voice told me this was different. ETA 2 minutes, Jake called out as we turned onto Sunset Boulevard. The familiar neon signs of late-night diners and 24-hour gas stations blurred past our windows. This part of LA never really sleeps, but at 3 in the morning, even the party crowd has mostly gone home. When we pulled up to the address, I saw her immediately. A middle-aged Hispanic woman was kneeling on the sidewalk next to a young girl who couldn't have been older than 24. The woman, who I later learned was Maria, the girl's mother, was crying and whispering something I couldn't quite hear. But as we approached with our equipment, her words became clear. "God, don't take her from me yet," she whispered, her hands clasped together in prayer. "Please, God, she's all I have left." The desperation in her voice hit me like a punch to the gut. In 10 years of doing this job, I've heard those words countless times. But there was something different about Maria's prayer. It wasn't just desperation. It was faith mixed with terror, hope battling against the worst possible outcome. The girl, later I'd learn her name was Isabella, was lying unconscious on the cold sidewalk. Her lips had a blue tint that every paramedic recognizes immediately. Her skin was pale, almost gray in the harsh street light. Jake was already checking her pulse while I prepared the oxygen mask. "What happened?" I asked Maria, though I was already running through protocols in my head. "She just collapsed," Maria sobbed. "We were walking back from her night shift at the diner. She said she felt dizzy, then she just fell down. She won't wake up. Please, you have to help her." Isabella worked the night shift, just like thousands of other young people in LA, trying to make ends meet, probably saving money for college or helping support her family. Looking at her lying there, so young and vulnerable, I felt that familiar surge of determination that every paramedic knows. This was someone's daughter, someone's world, and we were going to fight for her. Jake looked up at me with concern. "Pulse is weak and thready. Respirations are shallow. We need to get her to the ambulance now." We lifted Isabella onto our stretcher and rushed her to the ambulance. As we worked, Maria climbed in beside us, still whispering those prayers. I've learned not to ask family members to stay behind. Sometimes, love is the strongest medicine we have. Inside the ambulance, under the bright fluorescent lights, Isabella looked even worse. Her breathing was becoming more labored, and the monitor showed her vital signs declining rapidly. Jake started an IV while I prepared the advanced airway equipment. "Talk to me, Isabella," I said, even though she showed no signs of consciousness. "Stay with us. Your mom's here, and she needs you to fight." Before I continue, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. Stories like this one reach farther than you imagine. But Isabella didn't respond. Her chest rose and fell in an irregular pattern that made my stomach clench with worry. In my years as a paramedic, I've learned to read the signs. I've developed an instinct for when someone is fighting to stay alive and when they're beginning to let go. Isabella was letting go. "Marcus," Jake said quietly, his eyes fixed on the cardiac monitor. "Look at this." The rhythm was becoming increasingly erratic. Her blood pressure was dropping despite our intervention. Everything we'd been trained to do, the IV fluids, the oxygen, the medications, nothing was working. It was like watching someone slip through our fingers, no matter how tightly we tried to hold on. Maria must have sensed what was happening, because her prayers became more urgent. "Please, God," she whispered, "don't take my baby. She's got so much life left to live." As we raced toward Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, I found myself fighting against a growing sense of helplessness. This is the part of being a paramedic that no training can prepare you for. The moment when you realize that all your skills, all your equipment, all your experience might not be enough. Isabella's breathing became more shallow. The numbers on our monitors were telling a story no paramedic wants to see. Her heart rate was slowing down. Her oxygen saturation was dropping despite the mask delivering 100% oxygen. And then, at exactly 9 minutes after we'd loaded her into the ambulance, something happened that I'll never forget as long as I live. Isabella's breathing stopped, not slowed down, not became irregular, stopped completely. Jake and I looked at each other across her still body. The monitor showed a flat line where her heart rhythm should have been. No pulse, no breath sounds, nothing. "Starting CPR," I announced, positioning my hands on her chest. The familiar rhythm of compressions began. 1, 2, 3, 4. Push hard, push fast. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The same protocol I'd performed hundreds of times before. But this felt different. Isabella's body was so young, so small under my hands. Each compression felt like I was trying to restart not just her heart, but her entire future. Her dreams, her hopes, everything she hadn't had the chance to experience yet. Maria was crying harder now. "Don't leave me, mija," she whispered in Spanish. "Por favor, don't leave me." Jake was managing the airway, forcing oxygen into her lungs with the bag mask. "Come on, Isabella," he muttered under his breath. "Come back to us." 2 minutes of CPR. 3 minutes. 4 minutes. The ambulance hit a pothole, and for a split second, I lost my rhythm. In that moment of silence, all I could hear was Maria's sobbing and the mechanical sound of the ventilator Jake was using. No heartbeat. No sign of life. "How much further to the hospital?" I called out to our driver, Tony. 3 minutes, came the reply from the front. 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours. I continued the compressions, feeling sweat drip down my forehead despite the air conditioning in the ambulance. This is when doubt starts to creep in. This is when you start to wonder if you're just going through the motions, if the person beneath your hands is already gone and you're the only one who hasn't accepted it yet. At the 7-minute mark of CPR, something changed in the rhythm of my compressions. Not because of anything I did, but because Isabella's chest suddenly felt different, softer somehow, like the life was seeping out of her body even as I tried to pump it back in. Jake noticed it too. His eyes met mine over Isabella's face, and I saw the same recognition there. We both knew what was happening. We'd both seen it before. The body was giving up. "Marcus," he said quietly, so Maria wouldn't hear. "Her pupils are fixed and dilated." I looked down at Isabella's eyes. Jake was right. Her pupils weren't responding to the light from our penlight. In medical terms, this is one of the signs that the brain is no longer receiving adequate oxygen. It's one of the signs that tells you the person is gone. But I couldn't stop. Not with Maria sitting right there, not with Isabella looking so peaceful, almost like she was just sleeping. I kept pushing on her chest, counting out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4. Maria suddenly grabbed my arm. "Is she—" She couldn't finish the question. "We're still fighting," I told her, which was the truth. Even when hope is fading, paramedics don't stop fighting. We fight until the doctors at the hospital tell us to stop. We fight because that's what families need us to do. We fight because sometimes miracles happen. But deep down, I was losing hope. 8 minutes of CPR, 9 minutes, 10 minutes. In my radio earpiece, I could hear Tony calling ahead to the hospital. "Cedars-Sinai, this is Ambulance 47. We have a 24-year-old female, cardiac arrest, CPR in progress for 10 minutes, ETA 1 minute. The hospital's response crackled back. "Copy, Ambulance 47, Trauma Bay 2 is ready." 1 minute. Just 60 more seconds of this hell, and we'd be at the hospital where doctors with more equipment and more options could take over, where Isabella would either come back to life or be officially pronounced dead by someone with more letters after their name than I had. I looked down at Isabella's face. Even with everything we were doing, the CPR, the oxygen, the IV medications, she looked peaceful. Her skin had taken on that waxy quality that I'd learned to recognize over the years. The quality that told you a soul had already started its journey somewhere else. 10 seconds out, Tony called from the front. I felt the ambulance slow down as we approached the emergency entrance. Through the small window, I could see the trauma team waiting for us. Doctors in scrubs, nurses with their gloves already on, everyone ready to take over the fight for Isabella's life. 11 minutes of CPR, I announced as we prepared to transfer her to the hospital gurney. No response to any interventions. As we rolled toward the trauma bay, Maria walking beside us still whispering her prayers, I caught sight of the clock on the wall. It was 3:27 in the morning. Isabella had been unconscious for nearly half an hour. She'd been in cardiac arrest for 11 minutes. Dr. Anderson, the emergency physician, took one look at Isabella and immediately began his own assessment. "What do we have?" he asked as his team swarmed around the gurney. I gave him the rundown: age, circumstances, how long she'd been down, what we'd tried. Everything by the book. But even as I spoke, I could see in Dr. Anderson's eyes the same recognition that Jake and I had shared in the ambulance. "Continue CPR," Dr. Anderson ordered. But his tone had changed. It was the tone doctors use when they're going through the motions, because it's what the family needs to see. The trauma bay became a flurry of activity. More IVs, different medications, a more sophisticated airway. But Isabella remained still, unresponsive, absent. At the 15-minute mark, Dr. Anderson looked at the clock. I'd seen this moment before. This is when doctors start having quiet conversations about when to call time of death. This is when hope officially becomes false hope. Maria was standing in the corner, and I could see her lips moving in constant prayer. She hadn't stopped praying since we first arrived on Sunset Boulevard. Even now, with all the medical equipment and expertise in the world surrounding her daughter, she was still talking to God. "Please," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Please bring her back to me." Dr. Anderson looked at me, then at Jake, then at the monitors showing Isabella's flat-line heart rhythm. 16 minutes, he announced to the room, and that's when everything changed. It started with a sound I'll never forget. Not the beeping of a monitor or the whoosh of a ventilator, but something much quieter. A gasp. A single, desperate intake of breath that cut through all the noise in the trauma bay like a knife. Everyone froze. Dr. Anderson's hand stopped mid-compression. The nurses stopped what they were doing. Jake, who had been preparing another medication, turned toward the sound. Even the constant chatter of medical equipment seemed to pause. The gasp came from Isabella. "Did she just?" one of the nurses whispered. Before anyone could finish the thought, it happened again. Another gasp, stronger this time. And then, impossibly, Isabella's chest began to rise and fall on its own. The cardiac monitor, which had been showing that terrible flat line for 16 straight minutes, suddenly erupted with activity. Blip, 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 a rhythm, a heartbeat, life. "Oh my God," Dr. Anderson breathed, stepping back from the gurney as if he'd seen a ghost. I felt my knees go weak. In 10 years as a paramedic, I had never seen anything like this. People don't just come back after 16 minutes of cardiac arrest. The brain can't survive that long without oxygen. The heart doesn't just restart itself after that much time. It doesn't happen. It can't happen. But it was happening. Isabella's eyes fluttered open. Not the vacant, unfocused stare of someone in a coma, but alert, aware eyes that moved around the room, taking in her surroundings. When her gaze found mine, I felt something I can only describe as recognition pass between us. She tried to speak, but the breathing tube prevented any words from coming out. Instead, she raised one hand slightly, as if she was trying to wave. The gesture was so normal, so alive, that it sent chills down my spine. "Get Dr. Reyes down here now," Dr. Anderson called out, his voice shaking slightly. Dr. Reyes was the neurologist, someone who could assess whether Isabella's brain had been damaged by the lack of oxygen. But even as we waited, it was becoming clear that something extraordinary had happened. Isabella was trying to sit up. Her eyes were tracking movement around the room. When one of the nurses spoke to her, she nodded in response. Maria had been pushed back against the wall during the resuscitation, but now she rushed forward. "Mija," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Misha, can you hear me?" Isabella turned toward her mother's voice and squeezed her hand. It was such a simple gesture, but in that moment, it felt like watching someone reach across the divide between life and death. Dr. Anderson was checking her pupils with his penlight. "Reactive," he announced, and I could hear the amazement in his voice. Equal and reactive. This was impossible. After 16 minutes without a heartbeat, Isabella should have had severe brain damage. Her pupils should have remained fixed and dilated. She should have been in a coma if she survived at all. Instead, she was alert, responsive, and apparently completely aware of everything around her. "I need to remove this breathing tube," Dr. Anderson said. "Isabella, I'm going to count to 3, and I want you to cough when I get to 3, okay?" Isabella nodded. 1, 2, 3. She coughed, and Dr. Anderson smoothly removed the tube. Isabella took a deep breath. A beautiful, normal breath that filled her lungs completely. "Mom?" she whispered, her voice hoarse but clear. "I'm here, baby," Maria sobbed. "I'm right here." "What happened?" Isabella asked, looking around the trauma bay with confusion. "Where am I?" Dr. Anderson knelt beside her gurney. "You're in the hospital, Isabella. You had a medical emergency, but you're okay now. How do you feel?" "Tired," she said. "Really tired, and thirsty." Thirsty. She was worried about being thirsty. This young woman who had been clinically dead for 16 minutes was concerned about basic human needs. It was the most normal, most life-affirming thing she could have said. Dr. Reyes arrived and immediately began his neurological assessment. He checked Isabella's reflexes, her ability to move her fingers and toes, her memory, her cognitive function. Test after test came back normal. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked. "Isabella Martinez." "Do you know what day it is?" "Tuesday." "Well, it was Tuesday when I left work." "Is it still Tuesday?" "Do you remember what happened before you woke up here?" Isabella thought for a moment. "I was walking home with my mom after my shift at Danny's diner. I felt really dizzy all of a sudden, and then—" She looked confused. "I don't remember anything after that." Dr. Reyes looked at Dr. Anderson with an expression I'd never seen before on a doctor's face. It was pure bewilderment mixed with awe. "This is medically impossible," Dr. Reyes whispered to Dr. Anderson. But in the quiet of the trauma bay, we all heard him. I found myself thinking about Maria's prayers. From the moment we arrived on Sunset Boulevard until this very second, she hadn't stopped praying. Even during the most hopeless moments, when every medical indicator suggested that Isabella was gone forever, Maria had kept talking to God, and now her daughter was sitting up in bed asking for water. Jake walked over to me, still holding the bag mask he'd been using to ventilate Isabella just minutes before. "Marcus," he said quietly, "in all your years doing this, have you ever seen anything like this?" I shook my head. "Never. The textbooks say it's impossible." "I know. So what do we call it?" I looked over at Isabella, who was now sitting up completely, holding her mother's hand and talking to the doctors about how she felt. Her color had returned to normal. Her vital signs were stable. Her neurological function was perfect. By every measure we had, she was a completely healthy 24-year-old woman. Except that 20 minutes ago, she had been dead. "I don't know what we call it," I told Jake. "But I know what Maria would call it." As if she'd heard her name, Maria looked over at us. Her face was radiant with gratitude and joy, but there was something else there too, a kind of knowing, like she'd never really doubted that this moment would come. "Thank you," she said to Jake and me. "Thank you for not giving up on her." But we both knew the truth. We had been ready to give up. We had been going through the motions those last few minutes. If anything had saved Isabella, it hadn't been our medical skills or our equipment. Dr. Anderson was reviewing Isabella's chart with Dr. Reyes when the cardiac surgeon, Dr. Kim, arrived. He'd been called down to assess Isabella's heart function after her prolonged arrest. Let me get this straight, Dr. Kim said after being briefed on the situation. This young woman was in cardiac arrest for 16 minutes, with no response to any interventions, and then spontaneously returned to normal sinus rhythm with full neurological function? That's correct, Dr. Anderson replied. Dr. Kim looked skeptical. That's not medically possible. The brain can't survive that long without oxygen. I know, Dr. Anderson said. But here she is. Dr. Kim approached Isabella's bedside. Isabella, I'm Dr. Kim. I'm a heart specialist. Can you tell me if you have any chest pain or difficulty breathing? No, sir, Isabella replied. I feel fine, just tired. Dr. Kim listened to her heart with his stethoscope, frowning slightly. Her heart sounds are completely normal, he announced to the room. No murmurs, no irregular rhythms, no signs of damage from the arrest. This was getting more impossible by the minute. Dr. Kim ordered an EKG, an echocardiogram, and a full cardiac workup. Every test came back normal. Isabella's heart showed no signs of having stopped for 16 minutes. No damage, no scarring, no indication that anything unusual had happened at all. I need to see the ambulance records, Dr. Kim said to me. The exact timeline, the medications given, everything. I handed him our run sheet, the detailed record Jake and I had kept of every intervention, every medication, every vital sign from the moment we arrived on scene. Dr. Kim read it twice, then looked up at Isabella, then back at the paperwork. According to this, she received CPR for 11 minutes in the ambulance and continued CPR for 5 more minutes here in the trauma bay, he said. No response to epinephrine, no response to atropine, no response to any intervention. Fixed and dilated pupils. No pulse, no blood pressure, no respiratory effort. That's correct, I confirmed. And then she just came back? She just came back. Dr. Kim shook his head slowly. In 30 years of cardiology, I have never seen a case like this. The medical literature doesn't support survival after this length of arrest, especially with this level of neurological function. While the doctors continued their discussions, I found myself watching Isabella and her mother. Maria was stroking her daughter's hair, whispering to her in Spanish, thanking God over and over again. Isabella was looking around the trauma bay with curiosity, as if she was seeing the world with new eyes. Mom, Isabella said suddenly, I had the strangest dream. Maria leaned closer. What kind of dream, mija? I dreamed I was in a beautiful place, Isabella said, her voice soft and wondering. There was this incredible light, and I felt so peaceful. And there was someone there, someone who told me it wasn't my time yet, that I had more to do. The hair on my arm stood up. Patients who've had near-death experiences sometimes report similar visions, but Isabella had been dead for 16 minutes. This wasn't a near-death experience. This was an after-death experience. Did you see who it was? Maria asked. Isabella thought for a moment. I think it was Abuela Rosa. Maria's eyes filled with fresh tears. Abuela Rosa was Isabella's grandmother, who had passed away 5 years earlier. I'd heard similar stories from other patients who'd been resuscitated, but never from someone who'd been gone as long as Isabella. Dr. Anderson had been listening to this conversation, and now he approached Isabella's bedside. Isabella, do you remember anything about being in the ambulance or here in the hospital? No, she said. The last thing I remember is feeling dizzy on the sidewalk. Then I was in that beautiful place with Abuela Rosa, and then I woke up here. Dr. Anderson made notes in her chart, but I could see the confusion on his face. This case was going to challenge everything he thought he knew about medicine. At 4:15 in the morning, Dr. Anderson made the decision to admit Isabella for observation. Despite her miraculous recovery, they wanted to monitor her for 24 hours to make sure there were no delayed complications. As the trauma team prepared to transfer Isabella to a regular room, Jake and I began cleaning up our equipment. Our part of this story was over, but I knew I'd never forget what I'd witnessed. Maria approached us as we were packing up. I don't know how to thank you, she said. You didn't give up on her. Maria, I said, I have to be honest with you. We were ready to give up. What happened here? It wasn't because of anything we did. She smiled through her tears. I know. It was because of what he did. She looked up toward the ceiling. God heard my prayers. I'm not a religious man. Never have been. I believe in science, in medicine, in what I can see and measure and understand. But standing there in that trauma bay, looking at Isabella sitting up in bed after being dead for 16 minutes, I had to admit that some things can't be explained by science alone. As Jake and I loaded our equipment back into the ambulance, we were both unusually quiet. Finally, as we were driving back to the station, Jake spoke up. "What do you think really happened in there?" I thought about his question for a long time before answering. "I think sometimes the universe has other plans," I said finally. "And sometimes, love is stronger than death." "You think Maria's prayers actually worked?" "I think a mother's love moved mountains tonight." We drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, both of us processing what we'd witnessed. When we got back to the station, the other crews were eager to hear about our call. Word spreads fast in the paramedic community, especially about unusual cases. "So she was really dead?" asked Tommy, one of the veteran medics. 16 minutes of no pulse, no blood pressure, fixed pupils, I confirmed. "By every measure we have, she was gone." "And she just came back?" "She just came back." Tommy whistled low. "In 25 years, I've never heard of anything like that." Neither had I. And I knew I probably never would again. The next morning, before my shift ended, I did something I'd never done before. I called the hospital to check on a patient. Usually, once we drop someone off at the emergency room, our job is done. We move on to the next call, the next emergency, the next person who needs our help. But Isabella was different. "She's doing wonderfully," the nurse told me. "All her tests are normal. Dr. Anderson says he's never seen anything like it. She'll probably go home this afternoon." "Any complications? Any signs of brain damage?" "None at all. It's like nothing ever happened. She's been asking about the paramedics who brought her in. She wants to thank you. I thought about going to see her before I went home, but decided against it. Some moments are too sacred to revisit." What happened in that ambulance and trauma bay belonged to Isabella, to Maria, and to whatever force in the universe had decided that a 24-year-old girl with her whole life ahead of her wasn't ready to go. But I did drive past the diner where Isabella worked on my way home. Danny's Diner, a 24-hour place that serves coffee and hope to night shift workers all over Los Angeles. I wondered if Isabella would go back to work there, or if this experience would change the direction of her life. I wondered if she'd remember more about those 16 minutes she spent somewhere between life and death. I wondered if she'd always carry a piece of that beautiful place she'd visited, that peace she'd felt. Most of all, I wondered if I'd ever stop thinking about the night I watched a miracle happen in real time. 3 days later, I got my answer. I was at home, trying to catch up on some sleep after a particularly brutal shift, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it anyway. "Is this Marcus? The paramedic who helped my daughter Isabella?" It was Maria. "Yes, ma'am." "How is Isabella doing?" "She's perfect," Maria said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "She came home yesterday, and it's like nothing ever happened. But Marcus, she wants to see you. Both of you and your partner. She says she has something important to tell you." I felt a strange flutter in my chest. "Is everything okay? Is she having any complications?" No, nothing like that. She's completely healthy. But she's been having more memories about what happened that night, about what she saw." The hair on my arms stood up again. "What kind of memories?" "She remembers being in the ambulance with you. She remembers hearing your voice. And she remembers other things. Things that might help you understand what happened." I found myself agreeing to meet them at a coffee shop in West Hollywood the next afternoon. I called Jake, and he was just as curious as I was. We'd both been replaying that night over and over in our minds, trying to make sense of the impossible. The next day, Jake and I arrived at the coffee shop a few minutes early. We'd chosen a quiet place, away from the bustle of the main streets, somewhere we could talk without being overheard. When Isabella and Maria walked in, I was struck by how normal Isabella looked. Vibrant, healthy, alive. If I hadn't seen her lying dead on that hospital gurney with my own eyes, I never would have believed what had happened to her. "Marcus! Jake!" Isabella called out, waving as she approached our table. She moved with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in her own body, someone with no memory of trauma or pain. We stood up to greet them, and Isabella surprised me by giving us both long, heartfelt hugs. "I can't thank you enough," she said as we all sat down. "Mom told me everything you did for me that night." "We were just doing our job," Jake said, but Isabella shook her head. "No, you did more than that. And I remember." Maria ordered coffee for herself and Isabella, while Jake and I got our usual, black coffee, the fuel that keeps every paramedic running. Once the waitress left us alone, Isabella leaned forward, her eyes bright with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "I remember being in the ambulance," she said. "I remember hearing your voice, Marcus, telling me to stay with you, to fight. I remember the sounds of the equipment, the feeling of the ambulance moving. But here's the thing. I wasn't in my body when I heard all of that." Jake and I exchanged glances. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I was floating above it all, watching you work on this girl who looked like me. I could see you doing CPR, see Jake managing the airway. I could see my mom crying and praying, but I felt completely peaceful about it all, like I was watching a movie about someone else's life." Isabella paused to take a sip of her coffee, and I noticed her hands were completely steady. No tremor, no sign of the neurological damage that should have resulted from 16 minutes without oxygen. "Then I heard this voice," she continued. "It wasn't coming from the ambulance or from any person I could see. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And the voice said, 'You have a choice to make, mija.'" "Mija," Maria whispered. "That's what Abuela Rosa always called her." Isabella nodded. I turned around, and there was Abuela Rosa, looking exactly like she did when I was little. Young and beautiful, wearing that blue dress she loved so much. And she was standing in this place that was... I don't even have words for it. It was like being inside pure love, if that makes sense. It didn't make sense, not in any medical or scientific way. But sitting there listening to Isabella describe her experience, I found myself believing every word. "Abuela Rosa told me that my time on Earth wasn't finished," Isabella continued. "She said I had important work to do, people to help, love to give and receive. But she also said that if I was tired, if I wanted to stay with her in that beautiful place, I could. The choice was mine." "What made you choose to come back?" Jake asked. Isabella looked at her mother, and the love that passed between them was almost tangible. "I heard my mom's prayers. Even in that place of perfect peace, I could still hear her voice, still feel how much she needed me. And I realized that my story wasn't over yet." "So you chose to return?" "I told Abuela Rosa that I wanted to go back, and she smiled and said, 'Then go, mija. Go and live a life worthy of the second chance.' The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air in the hospital, and all of you were staring at me like you'd seen a ghost." The coffee shop had filled up with the usual afternoon crowd, students with laptops, business people having meetings, couples on dates. Normal life continuing around us while we sat discussing something that challenged everything I thought I knew about life and death. "Isabella," I said carefully, "do you understand what happened to you that night? Medically, I mean?" She nodded. "Dr. Anderson explained it all to me. He said that by every measure they have, I should have suffered severe brain damage. He said most people don't survive what I survived, and if they do, they're never the same. But you're completely fine." "Better than fine," she said with a smile. "I feel like I've been given a gift, like every day from now on is a bonus that I almost didn't get." Maria had been quietly listening to this conversation, but now she spoke up. "She's been different since that night," she said. "More grateful, more aware of the people around her. Yesterday, she spent her entire afternoon helping an elderly neighbor with her grocery shopping. Last night, she called 3 friends she hadn't spoken to in months just to tell them she loved them." Isabella blushed slightly. "When you've been to the edge of death and back, you realize how precious everything is. Every conversation, every sunset, every chance to help someone else. I don't want to waste any of it. I thought about all the patients I'd transported over the years. Most of them, if they survived their medical emergency, went back to their regular lives without much change. They were grateful for a while, but eventually, the experience faded into just another story they told at dinner parties. But Isabella was different. There was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a sense of purpose that seemed to radiate from her very being. "There's something else," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "Ever since that night, I've been having what I can only call visions. Not scary ones," she added quickly, seeing the concern on our faces. "Beautiful ones. I see people who are struggling, people who need help, and somehow I know exactly what to do for them." "Can you give us an example?" Jake asked. "Yesterday at the grocery store there was this woman in line ahead of me. She was counting out coins to pay for baby formula, and I could see she didn't have enough money. But more than that, I could sense her desperation, her worry about how she was going to feed her child. So I paid for her groceries." "That's very kind," I said. "But that doesn't necessarily mean—" "Wait," Isabella interrupted. "That's not the strange part. The strange part is that when I touched her hand to give her the receipt, I somehow knew that she had just lost her job and was too proud to ask for help from her family. I knew that she had been praying for a miracle, for some way to make it through the next week. And I knew that helping her wasn't just a nice gesture. It was exactly what I was supposed to do." Isabella paused, looking slightly embarrassed. "I know how that sounds. I know it sounds crazy, but ever since I came back it's like I can see people's hearts. Not their physical hearts, but their emotional ones. Their pain, their hope, their need for connection." I looked at Jake, and I could see the same thought reflected in his eyes. We'd both heard stories like this before, usually from patients who'd had near-death experiences. But Isabella's experience went far beyond near-death. She'd been clinically dead for 16 minutes. "The doctors have cleared you completely?" Jake asked. "No neurological concerns?" "None at all. Dr. Reyes ran every test he could think of. My brain function is completely normal. Actually, he said my cognitive tests were above average." Isabella grinned. "Maybe dying improved my IQ." Despite everything, we all laughed. It felt good to laugh about something that had been so terrifying just a few days ago. "So, what happens now?" I asked. "Are you going back to work at the diner?" Isabella's expression became thoughtful. "I am, but probably not for long. I've been accepted to nursing school. I applied months ago, but never thought I could afford it. But since this happened, I've realized that helping people isn't just something I want to do. It's something I need to do. It's why I came back." "Nursing school is expensive," Jake pointed out. "I know. But somehow I'm not worried about the money. I have this feeling that if this is what I'm meant to do, the way will open up." Maria reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Ever since Isabella was little, she's wanted to help people. Even as a child, she would bring home stray animals, befriend the lonely kids at school, spend her allowance on gifts for others. I always knew she had a special heart. And now that heart has been touched by something beyond this world," Isabella added, "I feel like I have a responsibility to use this second chance for something meaningful." As our conversation continued, I found myself studying Isabella's face, looking for any sign of the trauma she'd endured. But there was none. Instead, there was a serenity, a sense of purpose that seemed to glow from within. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come back? If you had chosen to stay with your grandmother?" Isabella considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, and I think it would have been beautiful, that place I visited. There was no pain there, no worry, no fear. Just pure love and perfect peace. But I also think about all the people I might be able to help by staying here. All the lives I might touch, all the love I might be able to share." She paused, looking directly at me. "And I think about the fact that you and Jake didn't give up on me, even when everything looked hopeless. If I had given up on myself, that would have meant your efforts were wasted. And somehow, that doesn't seem fair." The afternoon was getting late, and Jake and I both had to get ready for our evening shifts. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Isabella stood up and hugged us both again. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself." Walking back to our cars, Jake was quiet for a long time. Finally, he turned to me and said, "Do you think we'll ever fully understand what happened that night?" "No," I said. And maybe that's okay. Maybe some things aren't meant to be understood, just witnessed. Do you think it will happen again? Another case like Isabella's? I thought about that as I unlocked my car door. I hope so, I said finally. But even if it doesn't, knowing that it happened once changes everything. It changes how I see every patient, every call, every moment when someone's life hangs in the balance. How so? Because now I know that sometimes love really can conquer death, and that's worth fighting for. 2 years have passed since that night, and not a single shift goes by without me thinking about Isabella Martinez. But the story didn't end with our coffee shop conversation. If anything, that was just the beginning of something even more extraordinary. 6 months after Isabella's miraculous recovery, I got another phone call. This time, it wasn't from Maria. It was from Isabella herself. "Marcus, you need to come to UCLA Medical Center," she said, her voice filled with an excitement I'd never heard before. "Room 314, there's someone I want you to meet." When I arrived at the hospital, I found Isabella wearing scrubs with student nurse embroidered on the pocket. She'd kept her word about nursing school, and somehow the money had indeed worked out. A scholarship had appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, covering her entire tuition. "Come with me," she said, leading me down a familiar hospital corridor. "There's someone who's been asking about the paramedic who saved my life." In room 314, I met 7-year-old David Chen, a little boy who'd been in a car accident and was recovering from multiple surgeries. But what struck me immediately wasn't his injuries. It was the smile on his face as Isabella sat beside his bed, reading him a story. "David," Isabella said, "this is Marcus, the paramedic I told you about." The little boy's eyes went wide. "You're the one who wouldn't give up on Isabella when she was dead." Kids have a way of cutting straight to the heart of things. "That's right, buddy. Sometimes we have to keep fighting even when things look impossible." "Isabella says that's what the doctors did for me too," David said. "She says sometimes miracles happen when people don't give up." Later, in the hospital cafeteria, Isabella told me about her new life. She was excelling in nursing school, working part-time at UCLA Medical Center, and something else was happening. Something that both amazed and puzzled her doctors. "I can sense things," she said quietly. "When I'm with patients, I can feel what they need. Not just medical needs, but emotional ones. Yesterday there was an elderly man who was scheduled for heart surgery. Everyone thought he was just nervous about the procedure, but when I sat with him, I could feel that he was actually terrified of dying alone. So I stayed with him through the night, and it made all the difference." "What do you mean?" "His surgery went perfectly. But more than that, he told me afterwards that having someone there who understood his fear gave him the strength to fight. The surgeon said it was one of the smoothest recoveries he'd ever seen." Isabella paused, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "It's happening more and more. I'll be walking through the hospital, and I'll suddenly know that someone needs help. Not medical help. The doctors and nurses have that covered. But sometimes people need someone to listen, someone to hold their hand, someone to remind them that they're not alone. And you think this ability comes from what happened to you that night?" "I know it does. When I was in that place with Abuela Rosa, she told me something I didn't mention in our last conversation. She said that when someone returns from death, they bring a piece of that other world back with them. A kind of spiritual sensitivity that allows them to see beyond the surface of things." I thought about this as I watched Isabella interact with the hospital staff. Doctors sought out her opinions on patient care. Nurses asked her to sit with their most difficult cases. Even the hardened emergency room staff, people who'd seen everything, seemed to light up when Isabella was around. 3 months later, I got to witness Isabella's gift firsthand. Jake and I had transported a middle-aged woman named Susan to UCLA after a heart attack. She was stable but scared, and her family was flying in from out of state. As we were transferring her to the cardiac unit, Isabella appeared. "Susan," she said gently, taking the woman's hand. "I'm Isabella, one of the nursing students here. How are you feeling?" "Scared," Susan admitted. "This is my second heart attack, and the doctors keep talking about surgery. I keep thinking about my kids, about whether I'll be around to see my grandchildren grow up." Isabella sat down beside Susan's bed. "Tell me about your grandchildren." For the next 20 minutes, Isabella listened as Susan talked about her family, her fears, her hopes. She didn't offer medical advice or false reassurances. She just listened with a kind of deep, spiritual attention that seemed to calm Susan's entire being. When Susan's family arrived later that evening, they found her peaceful and optimistic. Her surgery the next day went perfectly, and her recovery was remarkably smooth. The cardiologist later told me that Susan's positive mental state had probably contributed significantly to her healing. "That nursing student of yours is something special," he said. "I've never seen anyone connect with patients the way she does." By her second year of nursing school, stories about Isabella were circulating throughout the medical community in Los Angeles. Patients specifically requested her. Families asked for her by name. Other nursing students wanted to know her secret. But Isabella always gave the same answer. "There's no secret. You just have to remember that every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. And sometimes, the most powerful medicine we can offer is simply letting them know they're not fighting alone." One evening, as I was finishing my shift, I decided to stop by the hospital to see Isabella. I found her in the pediatric ward, sitting with a little girl who was waiting for her parents to arrive. The child had been in a minor accident. Nothing serious, but she was scared and crying. Isabella was singing softly in Spanish, the same lullaby I'd heard Maria singing in the ambulance that night 2 years ago. The little girl had stopped crying and was listening with rapt attention. "My grandmother used to sing that song to me," Isabella told the child. "She said it was a song that called the angels to watch over us." "Do you think angels are real?" the little girl asked. Isabella smiled. "I know they are. Sometimes they wear scrubs and carry stethoscopes. Sometimes they drive ambulances and save people's lives. And sometimes they're grandmothers who love us so much that not even death can stop them from protecting us." As I watched this scene, I realized that Isabella had become something more than just a survivor of a medical miracle. She had become a bridge between the world of the living and whatever lies beyond. Her experience of death and return had given her a unique ability to comfort others facing their own mortality. 6 months before Isabella's graduation from nursing school, she asked Jake and me to meet her for lunch. She had news, she said, and she wanted us to be the first to hear it. "I've been offered a position," she said, practically glowing with excitement. "UCLA wants me to help develop a new program, a holistic patient care initiative that combines traditional medicine with spiritual and emotional support." "That sounds perfect for you," Jake said. "It is. But here's the thing. They want me to train other nurses and medical staff in what they're calling intuitive patient care. They want me to teach others how to sense what patients really need beyond their medical treatment." "Can that be taught?" I asked. Isabella thought about this. "I don't think everyone can develop the kind of sensitivity I have. That came from a very specific experience that I wouldn't wish on anyone. But I do think all medical professionals can learn to see patients as whole human beings, not just collections of symptoms. They can learn to listen with their hearts, as well as their minds." As we sat there talking about Isabella's future, I couldn't help but marvel at the chain of events that had led to this moment. If Maria hadn't prayed so fervently that night, if Jake and I had given up just 1 minute sooner, if the doctors at UCLA had called time of death just a few seconds earlier, none of this would have happened. Isabella would never have had her spiritual awakening. David Chen and Susan and hundreds of other patients would never have experienced her unique form of healing. The medical community would have lost a pioneer in holistic patient care. "Can I tell you something?" Isabella said as we were finishing lunch. "Every night before I go to sleep, I thank God for that moment of choice Abuela Rosa gave me. Because choosing to come back didn't just give me a second chance at life, it gave me a chance to be part of other people's miracles." Other people's miracles? Every time I help a scared patient find peace, every time I hold the hand of someone who's facing surgery alone, every time I can ease someone's fear of death, that's a miracle too. Maybe not as dramatic as someone coming back from the dead, but just as real and just as important. Today, Isabella Martinez is the director of holistic patient care at UCLA Medical Center. She's trained hundreds of medical professionals in what she calls heart-centered healing. She's written papers on the connection between emotional well-being and physical recovery. She's become a nationally recognized expert on integrating spiritual care into modern medicine. But more than any of that, she's living proof that sometimes, When love refuses to let go, miracles happen. As for me, I'm still a paramedic, still running toward emergencies when everyone else runs away. But Isabella's story changed how I approach every call. Now, when I'm working on someone who seems beyond help, I remember that love can be stronger than death. I remember that sometimes, the impossible becomes possible. And I never, ever give up hope. Because I learned that night in Los Angeles that some things belong not only to science, but to life and faith. If this story touched you, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. You're not alone, and neither was Isabella. Sometimes the love that surrounds us is so powerful that not even death can overcome it. And that's a miracle worth believing in.